Hey all, and welcome back to another long-awaited tutorial. Today I'll be taking you through the process of building this awesome looking street scene using a model building kit that is cast in plaster. Plaster kits have their challenges when compared to the more common plastic variety, but they are heaps of fun to build. So let's not waste any more time and get started building. The kit for this diorama is the worst block in town from Downtown Deco. It's pretty much a diorama in itself, and while there are only a few parts, it still makes a very interesting scene. Plaster kits, just like plastic kits, need some preparation before assembly, like removing the flashing from some of the edges. Plaster is quite soft, so using something like a seam scraper will easily clean up any leftover flashing. A small nail file is perfect for smoothing edges. The recesses for the door was a bit too shallow, so some extra material was needed to be removed in order to get it to fit a bit better. You could even cut right through the wall to allow the door to be modelled in the open position. There's a lot of flat edges, so to make sanding easier and more accurate, I fashioned up a sanding plate with some thick polycarbonate panel. Anything could work as long as it's flat. Some sandpaper is glued to the surface, and now I have a perfectly flat surface to sand on. Some of the walls are very slightly warped. The sanding plate is perfect for getting them flat again. Just make sure you don't sand away any of the edges that have detail moulded into them. This works great for the back of the walls and edges that butt together. If you do remove some of the detail, you can always go back and carve detail back into the plaster. Now they are ready for assembly. Having tools like machinist blocks and squares will make lining up parts much easier. I always dry fit each piece before gluing, just to make sure it's a perfect fit. I start by using 1-minute epoxy. While it worked okay, I don't recommend it. It cures quite fast and doesn't give you much time to position the parts. After using it for the first 2 walls, I ended up reverting to the 5-minute epoxy for the final wall. While the epoxy is still soft, is a good time to remove any excess epoxy. Because plaster is rigid, you can't bend it to fit and hide gaps, so you might be left with a gap or two. They can be filled in with plaster filler, but sometimes it comes at a cost, as it may fill in the detail as well. Before applying the filler, the plaster will need to be dampened so the filler will stick. The filler is applied as accurately as you can to prevent accidentally covering up the brick detail. Before the filler is dry, a wet brush is used to wash away any excess filler and help blend the filler in with the rest of the wall. Once the filler is set, detail can be scribed back into the wall, giving a seamless connection between the two pieces. Once the parts have been dusted to remove any plaster dust, they are ready for priming. To me, a surface primer works well for this. Once primed, it's ready for a coat of paint. The main brick colour is done with oxide red from Scale Modeller's Supply. It's a great brick colour, and once weathered it looks very convincing. You'll probably need 2 or 3 coats to get a good even coverage. An oil wash is made with some enamel thinners and light mud oil paint. The wash is liberally applied across the surface of the wall. You can see how well the oil wash works at filling in the gaps between the bricks. Heat can be used to speed up the drying of the thinners, however it will take a few days for the oil paint to cure. Which is good because next I'll be gently dragging a paper towel over the surface to remove excess oil from the top of the bricks. This process is repeated for each of the walls. The moulded in details are painted using a variety of Vallejo paints. I'm also adding a drop of Vallejo Flow Improver so the paint doesn't dry too fast when applying it to the model. I'm doing my best to be steady and avoid getting the paint onto the bricks. The rock foundation is painted a warm grey and some individual stones are painted with a darker grey-brown colour. This time a wash using Starship Filth oil paint is used to weather and fill in the gaps between the stones. Again, doing my best to avoid having it bleed up into the brick section above. I also use the Starship Filth on the cement edges of the building. Using this sponge helps add subtle streaks down the cement, while at the same time blending in any brush strokes that may have been visible. The vacant block areas are painted a concrete colour using Woodland Scenic cement. This bottle is getting quite old and gunky, so to thin it and remove any of the dried flakes so that it can pass through the airbrush, I first dilute it with Vallejo thinners at roughly a 1:1 ratio. The paint is quite thick. Once thoroughly mixed, I pass the paint through a stocking. This will remove any flakes. Now it's ready to be bottled and used in the airbrush. It's quite a thin mixture, but is great for the airbrush. You'll probably need at least 2 coats to get a nice even coat. The cement effect is made using some darker Vallejo paints. I use mostly grey RLM02 for the speckled layer of paint. By turning the airflow right down on the airbrush, you'll get a speckled effect. Once the droplet size is to your liking, it is sprayed over the surface of the model. I keep going until there's a moderate coverage. Next, I lightly mist over the original Woodland Scenic cement colour to blend it all together and lighten the colour of the cement. It's only a thin layer, as we want the speckled appearance to show through. Again, the Starship Filth oil paint is thinned down into a wash with thinners and can be liberally applied over the surface of the cement, getting a good even coverage. To give it that final mottled look, I dab it with a paper towel. The oil wash can be reapplied if you want a darker final result, but just one application seemed to work for me. Just like the main building, this stone detail is painted and a wash applied. Just being careful not to allow the wash to bleed up over the edge onto the cement area. The kit comes with some styrene for the roof. I changed mine a little bit and added some edge trim to the roof styrene. This just gives it a bit of extra detail and interest, and also acts as a lid for the building. I designed it to be removable because in a future project I'm planning to add lighting to the inside of the building. Painting is pretty straightforward. A dark grey for the base colour looks good. Some black is used to simulate the tar paper joins and repairs. And more Starship Filth was used for a bit of a weathered look. All the small details are painted as well. Once they had an undercoat, I painted them a dark green to match the theme of the building. To give them a bit of age, they get a dry brush with some off-white. A very thin piece of acetate is cut to size for the window pane. I also have some blinds and curtains printed that will attach to the windows as well. I've recently discovered liquid PSA from Micromark. This stuff works wonders for windows. Just add some to the back of each window, wait 5 minutes for it to turn clear, and then press the clear acetate in place. There's no glue oozing out or smears across the window this way. Some windows are separate. It can be extra work to add individual pieces of acetate, however it means some windows can be modelled in the open position, making it look more dynamic and realistic. Next up are the wall decals. Once they are cut out, they get soaked in some water. Some of the decals are quite large, so you'll need a large bowl or a plate of water to soak them in. After roughly 5 minutes, they should be free from the backing paper. The wall is prepped by brushing over a layer of Humbrol decal fix. Next, the decal is gently slid free from the backing paper into position on the wall. Once in place, excess water is soaked up with a sponge. Pressing the sponge down also helps seat the decal into the brick detail. With the decals in place, I finally brush over another layer of Humbrol decal fix. This will soften the decal so as it begins to dry, the decal will get sucked down onto the wall and into the brick recesses on the wall. The decals have a slight shine to them, so to remove any reflectivity, I mist all the decal areas with Tamiya flat spray. Now we can start adding those details like windows and doors. Another cool detail that comes with the kit are window awnings. These are very simple to build. By applying the plastic cement to the bending groove first, it will soften the plastic, making it much easier to bend without splitting the styrene. One of the awnings needed some grooves cut out so that it would fit better against the window. They get painted much like other details on the kit with a primer, followed by a main colour, some weathering using the oil wash, and lastly some weathering powder to add streaks. Once that's done, a misting of Tamiya flat spray is applied to lock down the weathering effects so they won't rub off. A little bit of Helmar Super Tack adhesive will hold them in place on the building. Now for the Diorama Base and the rest of the scenery. I had a plan to display this behind my workbench, so I measure up an area that will fit and start drawing out the design. Once happy, I assemble the base using some pieces of pine cut to size and nailed together. The openings are filled with some rigid insulation foam. This gives a nice base to work on, making it easier to create holes for trees and other details, while at the same time ensuring the diorama base isn't too heavy. Polyurethane glue is probably the best glue for this material. It will grab both the foam and the wood very well. The foam won't be going anywhere once this glue is cured. The glue itself acts a bit like foam once cured, and any excess glue is easily cut away and sanded, leaving a nice smooth surface. You may also notice I've added wood filler to the edges of the diorama frame to help hide the joins and the nail holes. With the base complete, the layout is traced onto the foam. The road is created using polycarbonate sheet and is 0.8mm thick. The road is traced onto the sheet and then cut out and test fitted. For the footpath and building foundations, I'm using PVC foam board. In much the same way the layout design is traced onto the foam board. It's much easier to cut compared to the polycarbonate. All the features are drawn onto the board, including the footpath as well as the outlines of the buildings. Using a fine liner like this is better than using a texter or large marker because there's a chance you'll leave a black line along the base of your building. Now a sharp hobby knife is used to cut around the lines, leaving us with a raised footpath and building foundations. I decided to add some 3D printed road detail as well. So to make space for the manhole covers, I cut out a hole that roughly looks about the right size for a manhole cover. Paint doesn't like sticking to flat shiny surfaces, so to make the road paintable, I sanded both the front and the back of the polycarbonate sheet using a fine sandpaper. Fine enough so obvious sanding scratch marks can't be seen. My tried and true method for roads involves an initial coat of Rust-Oleum flat grey primer. This is then followed up with a misting of satin heirloom white. It's a very fast sweep so it leaves a speckled appearance. Some of the paint particles will have dried before sticking to the surface, so any leftover paint dust is wiped away once it's dry. A bit of road weathering is done with a black-brown mixture diluted with water and made into a wash. I don't use oil wash because the enamel thinners will dissolve the Rust-Oleum paint and cause it to smudge. The wash is heavily applied to the road and then a paper towel is used to dab away the excess while also leaving an uneven mottled look. I did this process twice to achieve a road colour that I was happy with. To further lock down all that paint, I give the road a coat of flat spray. This helps the paint resist scratches and peeling off. Road lines are added by masking them onto the surface. Most masking tapes work well, however the Tamiya tape seems to work really well and helps avoid paint bleeding underneath the tape. It's a bit time consuming, but it looks great once finished. By spraying some flat spray first, it will help block any small gaps under the masking tape, so when we apply the white, it won't have a chance to bleed under the tape. The white lines are simply done with white primer. I try to be a little careful when removing the masking tape. I want to avoid accidentally peeling any of the road paint by lifting the tape too fast. As for the footpath and foundations, make sure to remove the protective plastic before painting. The gutter edge is sanded so that it's slightly rounded. The foam is very easy to sand, so be careful that you don't accidentally sand away too much material. Lines for the footpath are marked with a fine liner first to ensure they look reasonable. Once all marked out, they are scribed with a hobby knife. These will really pop once the oil wash gets applied. Once done, make sure to wipe away the fine liner because it will bleed through the paint. And just like the road, it gets a light sanding before painting. The footpath gets the exact same treatment that the cement building slabs got. The only difference is that after the speckled effect is applied, I lightly mist over some Vallejo cement acrylic paint. It's just a thin layer to give the footpath a very subtle difference over the building slabs we painted earlier. Then it got the same top coat over everything using the Woodland Scenic cement colour and the oil wash to give the mottled weathered look. Before it's all glued down, the holes are cut out for the manhole and the drain. I'm cutting right the way through because I might want to model an open manhole at some point in the future. The diorama edges are smoothed with some filler paint and a light sanding in preparation for painting. The manhole openings are painted black, as well as the join line between the footpath and the road. Just in case there are any gaps, at least they won't be light green. The rest of the base is painted brown so that if any spots get missed later when applying the scenery, they won't be so obvious. Polyurethane glue works really well, gluing the polycarbonate to the foam. Once the bottom surface is coated and the road is positioned onto the base, it will need to be weighed down. The polyurethane glue expands as it cures, and if not weighed down, the road surface will shift. The footpath needs to fit flush against the road, so any excess glue preventing that will need to be removed. The footpath is glued the same way, however I roughen the bottom of the footpath with a knife first, so the glue gets a good hold. The polyurethane glue takes about 3 hours to reach a point so that we can continue. After about 48 hours, it should be fully set. Behind the building will be an old railway track. It's not a functioning piece of track, so I'm not too worried about fixing it down. A simple bead of wood glue that is spread out is more than enough to hold it down. It's just placed in a position and left as the glue sets. Now for the grass. I'm creating my own custom grass mats for this project. I like this method for areas around buildings like this because it gives you much more control over how the area needs to look. It's especially useful if you're adding grass in areas where the buildings are already mounted to the base. It can be very hard to get a static grass applicator right up against a building. I'm experimenting by adding some dirt first. I want the area to be sparsely grassed with patches of dirt. Now the grass is applied. The grounding clip is attached to the tray, and then the grass is applied to the wet glue, holding the applicator about 3 to 4 centimeters above the surface. Excess is removed by flipping the tray upside down and gently tapping on the bottom. More dirt is added right over the top, creating those patches of dirt that I wanted. Once that's done, it's all permanently fixed in by misting over some isopropyl alcohol followed up with some scenic glue. After it's dry, the grass will peel away from the baking paper and it's ready to be used. To use the grass, simply cut it out to the desired shape and fit it in place. To cut it to specific spots, a hobby knife can be used to cut along an edge while the grass is in place. That way you'll get a perfectly fit patch of grass without needing to sprinkle grass all over your model. If you do it right, you shouldn't be able to see any joins between the different sections of grass. To glue it down, I'm using Mod Podge Matte. I apply the glue to both the surface of the diorama as well as the back of the grass mat. The glue will also help soften the grass mat, allowing it to mould to contoured areas as well. This process is repeated across all the areas where grass will be applied. Blending the edges of the grassed areas is easily done with some dirt texturing. Once happy with the coverage of dirt, it's fixed down with a misting of isopropyl alcohol, shortly followed up with some scenic glue. The track gets some ballast using Woodland Scenic's grey blend. It doesn't need to be perfect, as this will be a background feature and is also a railway track that doesn't see a lot of traffic. The same process of alcohol and scenic glue is applied to fix it down. Now it's time for the buildings. The foam is roughened up and then the polyurethane is used to mount the buildings. With them down in place, they are weighed so they won't move as the glue expands and sets. Most of the detail here is 3D printed on the Nova 3D Bene 4 Mono 3D printer. If you've seen my past videos, you'll know that I use this a lot for adding detail to model scenes and dioramas. However, you can also purchase 3D printed details like these from Scientific Models that you can get from Micromark. These are also 3D printed details, so if you don't have access to a 3D printer, you can still find all sorts of cool details online. Preparing and painting 3D printed details is much the same as any other detail. Remove it from the sprue, sand away any imperfections, prime it with an undercoat, and then paint the detail as desired. After many hours of painting and weathering, you'll be left with a small collection of details to fill out your scene. I realised I had no space for the phone booth and mailbox. An added benefit of using grass mat is that it's easy to remove in small sections. So once a small area of grass was removed, I could place the slab and have a spot for the phone booth and mailbox. These power poles are from a previous video. They make a huge difference to the scene, so if you want to make some, the video will be linked in the description. Getting them straight in is a challenge, so I used a guide to help ensure the drill was perfectly vertical. Now it's time for all the little details to be glued, like the drain on the side of the road. When it comes to adding details, I try to use as little glue as possible, and I try to use hobby tack adhesive where I can, so that the details can be pulled back up without damaging the paint and moved around if needed. Hobby tack from Woodland Scenics is really good for this. As the details populate the scene, it starts to look much more realistic. To help out the workers, I made a small ramp so that they could drive the materials up onto the cement slab. It's these types of details that make a scene look much more believable and give it some purpose. At the moment, everything looks a bit clean. To dusty things up a bit, I'm using some dark earth weathering powders, focusing on areas where you might get a build-up of dirt and grime. It also helps highlight the wheel tracks along the road and dull down the white road markings as well. A sponge is sometimes useful to remove the powder if too much was applied, and to help blend areas together a little bit better. Road signs are a must. These two are from an older video that will be linked in the video description. Trees come next. This really adds a nice bit of colour to the scene, and also helps mask the edges of the diorama, making the edge not look so obvious. Low-lying bushes and weeds are added using some Woodland Scenics coarse turf. Isopropyl alcohol and scenic glue are used to fix them in position. Using an eyedropper or syringe helps control where the glue is applied, because we want to avoid getting it over any of the painted details and weathering. And for our final detail, I'm adding power lines using black Easy Line. This is the best stuff for doing power lines because it sticks really fast to the super glue, and you can get a really nice drooping effect between the power poles. It's just really delicate and can take a bit of practice to get the lines to look just right. Excess is trimmed away with some sharp scissors. And that completes the diorama. I just love how this scene turned out, and there's always so much more that could be added to make it pop even more. It's one of those projects that just keeps going and can be added to over the lifetime of the model. I hope you enjoyed watching, and if you like it, be sure to subscribe for more videos to come. Cheers, and thanks for watching.